Question number 9. Order. Question number 9, Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Education, does she stand by her statement that in the event a charter school closes before the end of its contract, quote, "We will use the usual commercial instruments available to us to recover costs invested by the government," end quote. If so, which specific provisions of the contract with Whangaruru School allow for the recovery of funds in the event that school closes?
Honourable Hiki Parata.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
Yes to the first part of the question, and in respect of the second part, it would be inappropriate for me to predetermine the outcome of the process that the school in Whangaruru is currently in.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't speculating that the school was about to close, and it is a question on notice. It is not unreasonable to ask that the Minister actually gives a fulsome answer to a question that has been lodged on notice.
Well, I think the way forward is I will allow the member an additional supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Who owns the 100 hectares of farmland that have been purchased for Whangaruru School, and which provisions, if any, of the contract with that school allow for the Crown to make any claim to that land in the event that the school closes?
Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr. Speaker, the sponsoring trust owns the assets of the schools. If I was to predetermine the outcome of that, I would be anticipating the kind of legal actions we might need to take in the hypothetical situation that that particular school might arrive at a particular end to the process they're currently in.
Goodness.
Supplementary question,
Mr. Speaker.
Chris Hipkins.
Do charter school contracts allow the government to reclaim any of the set-up costs or unspent operating costs in the event that any charter school closes before the contract has been completed? If so, which clauses in the standard contract allow for that?
Honourable Hiki Parata, either of those two supplementary questions.
Mr. Speaker, helpfully the contract is online and has been publicly available for some considerable period of time, so I could direct the member to that, but it would depend on the nature of the breach of the termination were it to occur as to the remedies available.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Do charter school contracts allow the government to recoup any assets at the end of the contract if it isn't renewed?
Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr. Speaker, we have no contracts with charter schools. We have contracts with partnership schools, and, well, I want to answer truthfully. So no, I don't have any charter school contracts.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, this is a question on notice. The word charter school is used in the primary question. The word charter school is used in the government's confidence and supply agreement with the ACT Party, which resulted in these schools being established. If the Minister had a problem with the terminology, there was plenty of opportunity for her to address that prior to now. To simply not answer a question based on the fact that she doesn't like the terminology that's being used is unacceptable. It's an offence to the House.
Order. No, I don't.
Order, Mr. Speaker.
I'll allow the member, the Minister to...
The legislation that was passed establishing these legal entities called partnership schools, on which that member was a member of the Select Committee, makes it clear at law that what exists is a partnership school. Because the member is now verging into technicalities relating to the contracts, I have said I don't have a contract with a charter school.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
No, I don't need further assistance. The difficulty I have with the Minister's argument is when I look at the primary question, which has been accepted as a question on notice, it does utilise the words charter schools, but it probably shouldn't have at the time. It's been there now. I'm going to invite the member to ask that question again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do partnership school contracts allow the government to recoup costs recoup any assets in the event that a contract isn't renewed?
Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said already, the contract provides for remedies dependent on the breach were a school to be terminated. So I can't anticipate which path we might go down in the hypothetical situation of a school having their contract terminated.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Chris.
I think the Minister might have misheard the end part of the question. I wasn't asking about termination. I was asking about a contract not being renewed. Those two things are actually quite separate.
No, I think on this occasion the Minister adequately addressed the question that was asked.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Do partnership school contracts allow the school operators to claim additional, quote, committed costs, end quote, from the government in the event of early termination of their contracts? If so, what are the nature of those conditions?
Honourable Hiki Parata, either of those two questions.
Mr Speaker, I'm going to have to ask the member to repeat his question because I'm not clear which particular...
That's easy for me to manage. Would the member please repeat the question? And hopefully just one question.
Do partnership school contracts allow for the school operators to claim additional, quote, committed costs, end quote, from the government in the event of early termination of their contracts?
Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr Speaker, I'd have to take advice on that because I don't want to mislead the House, and that is a particular technical question in the contract. I'm happy to come back. I'm not a lawyer.
Order. Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
How many students are currently on the roll at Whangaruru School, and how many students are they being funded for?
Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr Speaker, I'm advised that there are 37 on the roll and they're being funded for 40.
Question number 10, Dr. Panjit.